Hello everyone, welcome to Oxide Radio. My name's Grace. I'm the current VP for Welfare and Equal Opportunities of the Oxford SU, which means I'm just a sabbatical officer who's taken a year out to work with the student union and consult on different student issues. And a big student issue that we all kind of want to be talking about right now is student mental health. And so we've organised this segment on Oxide Radio today in honour of Mental Health Awareness Week to really, get a bit deeper into these conversations because there's been a lot of campaigning, there's been a lot of attempts to reduce stigma, and I think it's just worth furthering that conversation, thinking about how can students, institutions, individuals navigate through this landscape now. And so we've got two great people in the room to chat to today who can provide some really great insight. So Jessie from the Oxfordshire Recovery College and Jane Harris, who is from the University Counselling Service. So thank you very much for being here. Both of you, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hello, so good afternoon everybody. So I'm Jane Harris. I'm relatively new in post, heading up the Student Counselling Service at the University. Many of you will be aware of the service. We're part of Student Welfare and Support Services. We're part of the Central University Provision, so we kind of supplement and complement the amazing welfare support that is offered by colleges and departments. We predominantly offer counselling and psychotherapy, sort of individual appointments, but there's also a fairly big group of workshops programme. And I think I'll stop there because I suspect some of the detail about what we do will come out through the course of our conversation. So, but thank you very much for inviting me to be here.
That's amazing. Great to have you. Thank you, Jane. Yeah, Jessie, if you want to introduce yourself.
Okay. So hi, I'm Jessie. So I'm the college coordinator for Oxfordshire Recovery College. So I'm also relatively new, not as new as Jane, but I was in the position since November last year. So Oxfordshire Recovery College is a charity. It's situated within Restore, the charity on Mansell Way. It's a mental health charity, and we're also part of the Oxfordshire Mental Health Partnership. So we offer free courses on mental health to professionals in mental health services, also service users of mental health services, and carers and relatives of those with mental ill health. But yeah, thank you, Grace, for inviting us today.
Yeah, it's great to have kind of two different perspectives that Oxford students might encounter sort of within the university and outside of it, because I think seeking help can be kind of from both places. So it's great to have that and both of you on board. Thank you so much. So yeah, we're just going to have a little discussion today about what mental health means right now, kind of like what we're doing in terms of promoting awareness. I think most people have the term mental health in their vocabulary, hopefully these days, but I think we can really get into the nuances today, and hopefully from now on, thinking about how it affects different people, and especially in the interest of students, what students are thinking about right now in terms of mental health. And yeah, just kind of digging into those things, not necessarily seeking to answer any questions specifically, but hopefully keeping people informed. So one of the first questions I had for you both, and I can probably chip in as well on this one, is how do you feel like we as a society perceive mental health these days, and how might it have changed from before?
So who's going to begin?
I was going to say, did you want us to?
So I should add that I've been working within student mental health and counselling services now for, must be close to 15 years. And one of my roles is that I chair a national group which is for heads of university counselling services, and I'm also involved in some other kind of national networks that are dedicated to thinking about student mental health. And I was actually at a conference yesterday in Manchester about mental health in higher education. So when I speak, I suppose part of what I'm doing is harnessing what I hear from colleagues around the four nations, and I also what we're learning from research and data sets around just student mental health, young adult mental health, and also what we're seeing in schools, in primary and secondary schools. So here's what we currently know. So we know that the numbers of young people reporting and describing experiences of significant distress, emotional and psychological distress, are growing. We know that the number of young people who are meeting diagnostic criteria, particularly for kind of what's technically called mild to moderate mental health difficulties such as anxiety and depression, are increasing. And we also know that presentations of some of the more concerning difficulties that somebody might experience, such as eating disorders, post-traumatic stress, they're also increasing. But at the same time as this, we also know that 1% of the population that are likely to experience what's called a kind of a much more serious and enduring mental illness that would sit within, which would need psychiatric support, would benefit from psychiatric support, that's staying fairly stable. So the 1% of people that might receive a diagnosis of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or a personality disorder, so that's staying quite stable. So there's something kind of interesting happening socially, and I think it's definitely the case that levels of distress are increasing. And it's definitely the case that I think life for young people is a lot more unsettled than it used to be. So whether we think about environmental anxiety, financial insecurity, economic instability, migration, there's so much happening globally for us to be kind of, I think, affected by. So it's definitely the case that young people are experiencing higher levels of distress. The thing I don't know is whether there really is a mental health crisis going on, or whether we have lots of different things going on that's currently all sitting within the umbrella term of a mental health crisis, because I think there's probably more than one explanation for what we're seeing. So that's my kind of starter for 10, but certainly if you look at the data, so if you look at the University of Oxford, the students presenting for support through the counselling service, the numbers have more than doubled in the last 10 years. And what we do know is the students coming to see us have a very compelling need to receive psychological help and to receive therapy. So it's not that we think there isn't something to address, but my question is whether it's always illness or whether it's something that we need to think about in a broader, less medical model and more thinking about ourselves as social, sort of, the psychosocial model, where we think about all the domains of life and the things that are affecting us across all domains of life. So that's quite a long ramble from me, but
no, that's really helpful.
It's really and I think thinking about like the language maybe that we're using around like mental health in general, I think it's been brought forward more into like the public discourse as like a topic that we're talking about in media. And I think you're right in the sense of like there's less of a defined difference between having mental health or struggling with mental well-being as well, and like well-being being different to mental illness. And I think the language in that has changed. I think we're starting to see mental health more similarly to physical health, and that we all have mental health, but whether that's like a healthy mental health, like a good mental health, like on a continuum to being like a poor mental health, and then to mental illness. And I think that's it, that we all have mental health and we all are on a continuum, but actually the way there is a distinct difference between having struggling with your mental health and then having mental ill health. I think it's all right if I come in, Grace?
Please do.
One of my colleagues in another institution said that people used to talk about the 1 in 4 model. 1 in 4 adults are likely to experience a mental health difficulty or mental illness in their lifetime. And she said, well, in a way it's 1 in 1. She said, because most people between birth and death are going to have some kind of experience that really profoundly affects them for a period of time. And the one that I often think about is bereavement. So to be bereaved of somebody that you're very, very close to can be utterly debilitating, but it doesn't mean you're mentally ill, but it means you're really suffering, and you're going to really benefit from support. You're going to benefit from your friends and your family, and a kind of a compassionate response from the world around you. And so there's something about how we kind of loosen up our language that I think could be helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jane. And I think something that I was very aware of even when I was building my manifesto or thinking about what kind of impacts Oxford students, which we'll get onto in a second, was just about kind of a more symptom-led approach from everyone, including the people who are describing themselves. So, I'm experiencing low mood rather than I am depressed, or kind of thinking about how to kind of change that language, like you were talking about as well, Jessie. And I'm very aware that my question talked about us as a society, but I think something else has kind of changed, is that we're so aware of how different people, because of their identity or their lived experience of something, will encounter mental health difficulties differently. And so I could talk about sort of how the UK and how national discourse is kind of thinking about things, but also I guess it's worth thinking about within communities what's happening. I remember kind of attending mental health first aid training and thinking about how mental health difficulties affect, for example, people from the Black community differently, queer people differently. So it's kind of, I think we're getting to those nuances as well, which I'm really, really happy about.
Yeah, no, I would just completely agree with that. And I think that there is becoming that recognition now to do with like identity and how like exposed or like we're more exposed, or I don't know what the word would be, but we're able to be more susceptible to mental health from those different communities, like deprived areas as well. But I think that's what's quite interesting about how mental health and the way society perceives mental health has changed so much. I think we're getting more of that integration into communities compared to what it's been like throughout like the 1900s, where it was very much like people with mental ill health were kept separate from society and in big like an asylum in one place. And I think like throughout the 1900s and probably up to the millennium, we're only just really seeing this development of mental health charities and organisations having that being kind of like a point between those spaces and like bringing people together and integrating people with mental ill health into the community, which is really brilliant, like in that sense.
And I do think a lot of charities have really led the way in thinking about accessibility of services and how you might bring services to community groups rather than expecting people to navigate all the challenges and the barriers. Picking up on your point, Grace, around different groups and different experiences, and also I think they're not really susceptibilities, but the thing I'm thinking about is going back to this idea that we're social, cultural, we're affected by the economy, society, politics, culture. And I think so if you're in a disadvantaged group which is subject to higher levels of discrimination, prejudice, things like microaggressions, so you're already navigating a kind of living environment that can potentially be quite hostile. And so I think there's things for us to be very aware of around what an unequal playing field it is, or an uneven playing field it is for everybody. And then if you load on to that the fact that things like some communities will experience much higher levels of poverty, won't have access to the same resources, and there's all the subtle stuff that goes on around kind of cultural capital. So I think there are lots of things to really take into account. I think it's only recently we've started really thinking that actually it's not good enough to say, oh, we're an open access service, if actually in the practice that the numbers aren't showing you that people are accessing your service in a way that's proportionate to the population.
Thank you so much. I might move us on now to just thinking a bit more about the student context specifically. So I think that was a great introduction and actually teased out some of the things I've kind of been wanting to know about for ages. So thank you both. And I think we can combine my next two actually. So I'm quite interested in sort of how all of this national discourse that we talked about can affect students specifically. But if we could think about Oxford students and how Oxford students can also sort of might face some unique challenges and kind of how that might affect how we think about mental health in Oxford within the university, that'd be great as well.
If I could say so, and I'm quite interested to hear from you on this, Grace. So something I've observed and has been reflected in university counselling services across the country is students increasingly telling us that they find it really hard to admit, not just to staff but also to their peers, if things are going wrong. So I in my mind it's like a kind of culture of excellence, and I think of it as excellence in everything, not just academically but socially, in terms of intimate relationships, in terms of it's like kind of performance. And so I feel as if students nowadays, and particularly Oxford students, and this is an assumption in a way, feel they're under more pressure to be excellent at everything. And the problem is none of us can be excellent at everything. We all have to be a bit ordinary at times, and we all get things wrong. And I just wonder whether one of the pressures, and this is not just academic pressure about being a young person at Oxford, and actually probably a mature student at Oxford as well, is there space to be a fallible human being, to kind of put your foot in it. And so that's my kind of initial thought. I'm interested in what you both think.
I don't know if you want to hop on that, or I can kind of more directly answer.
You go for it as an Oxford student, so I think you've got insight.
Thank you. I really agree with that. I think for me as a fresher, that was a lot of the pressure there. But I think as it evolved and as I sort of began to look at myself as a student, evaluating kind of even apart from grades, the larger pressures to be excellent in different ways. So you're going to the same university as Malala, for example, and thinking about kind of comparisons with your peers. But I also think there are loads of other factors that can come in. So like expectations from maybe your tutors or the people around you, even if you don't necessarily want the same things. From parents, from the idea that your experience at Oxford needs to be something, needs to mean something, especially because of how much hard work it tends to be. But I also think there's something about the 8-week term, and this is maybe quite undergrad specific, because I know that postgrads have a different experience of terms, but there's something about the intensity of the workload over the 8-week term that I think might distort your perceptions of how you're feeling about something. So I think there's a saying, I don't know how common it actually is, but like a week in Oxford is like a month in other places. I think people kind of might say that. So it's the idea that if you're thinking about the longevity of an emotion, or you're feeling a lot of pressure with constant deadlines, all of that can mount into quite strong feelings that then might seem indistinguishable from being ill, and thinking about what that does, especially if you have to explain why you're not feeling able to maybe pick up work or be as excellent as you normally are. Does an illness seem like a better excuse, quote unquote, than actually just not being very well for a while and being able to bounce back from that? So I think all of that, the language we're using, the intensity, how we perceive our emotions in such a short and intense period of time, a lot of displacement as well, having to move in and out for undergrads. I think a lot of that can come into play. Yeah.
I think probably, I can only speak from my experience of being a student at Liverpool University, and even as a student there, I found that pressure of not being able to open up and talk about how I was feeling, and that's as a student from a Russell Group university, but not a level of Oxford students where, like you said, that I think with workload it's just, and pressure, you're just on, it's another level. And I am curious as well, do you find that people talk that much about mental health? Would anyone admit, I think there's an assumption, I found this as a student, that the link between mental health, or even admitting you're struggling, is feels like a weakness, and it's not seen as something that you would want to admit, because if you're wanting to be successful, you can't have any sort of mental health struggles. You need to be emotionally successful, quote unquote. But yeah, I think what's your opinion on what it's like at Oxford, and how open you can talk about these things?
Thank you. I mean, I think there are different pockets that one might find themselves in. I think there's definitely a pocket where it's about resilience, but not necessarily a healthy form of resilience, the kind that makes you feel like you need to take everything on the chin. Nothing needs to be processed properly. You just have to get through it, which I think is definitely the case. But I think there's also maybe a little pocket where people talk about their emotions quite often and are quite maybe self-deprecating and can pathologize things a lot. So I think there are definitely kind of different ways to absorb, that people kind of absorb and cope with all of that pressure. But I don't know, it's a tough one, because when it comes to discussing mental health, I think a lot of people aren't sure or don't want to talk about it until they can justify it as something that's really bad and that warrants sympathy. Which I think, oh, you just want to push the button there. Yeah, there you go. I think that's something that really I find quite hard to navigate, in terms of, if I say I'm struggling with this essay, does it warrant enough sympathy? Than if I say that it's an illness and I'm trying to sort of cover my own back and think, oh yeah, there's a reason why I can't do this work, and it's it's not me, it's something that I can't control, and all of that rhetoric becomes more difficult.
I think the statistic is, I think 75% of young people would not admit to telling their friends that they're struggling with their mental health, because they don't feel that their mental health is a big enough problem. I think that's it. People are waiting for that idea of I think people are waiting to be able to have something that justifies it.
Yeah, of course. Just gonna let Jane back in. Yeah, I think that's probably something that's new. And I think if you think about that culture of Oxford, if you already have that sort of base assumption that everyone here is excellent, why would someone, want to, listen to you moaning about something, and if you think it's moaning and all of that rhetoric there. So we're just talking about that I guess discourse there, and people not wanting to admit things until they're bad enough, quote unquote.
Yeah, I think there's a lot around. I think you could unpack the notion of, and the word failure is kind of problematic, but we'll use it for now because we all know what I mean. But I think unpacking the notion of failure and how we understand it and what it means to individuals. So I heard somebody speak recently about the assumptions that staff were making, academic staff, about what failure was to a student. In other words, kind of literally a failure in the eyes of the staff would be if something got so catastrophically bad you had to kind of completely leave your course and you were never able to return. Whereas through talking to students, they understood that actually a lot of things that staff thought were not big issues were experienced quite profoundly as failings individually for students, and they felt very embarrassed about it. And so there was also something about the level of awareness, like are we understanding what from the outside doesn't look like that should just be a bump, to somebody else it feels really significant and really quite debilitating, and we know that there's a whole kind of set of emotional links between kind of ideas of failing and then shame and embarrassment and humiliation. They're some of the hardest things to manage personally, and they're often the hardest things to talk about, are the things that we feel quite ashamed about. So even if from the outside we're like, well, there's nothing to be ashamed, why, that's fine. But I think if it's you, it can feel really overwhelming. So there's something about, for me, about the culture, how do we create kind of tolerant, compassionate, supportive communities where we're allowed to be fallible, we're allowed to kind of get things wrong.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the other questions I had, and it slightly relates to this, is if people then have their own personal definitions or personal understandings of what it means to be mentally ill, one might kind of absorb that. And of course, it's important to always talk about it, whether or not you're sure about what you're feeling. But where do you think our notions of health come from, and therefore our notions of illness come from? I think that's something that I'm really, really interested in, just because, as you were saying before, Jane, we're impacted by our economic place and standing, we're, social beings as well. And so sometimes if I feel like I'm not functioning well in the day, or if I find it hard to get out of bed or whatever it is, it can sometimes be, am I tired? Thinking about, have I eaten? All these sorts of things that I need to think about. How, I guess my question is, how can one perceive what it means to be ill, or report, or want to talk about something with a professional, for example, if they're not quite sure of what health looks like for them? And that's kind of what I'm interested in there.
Good question.
It's a good question.
Not sure if there's a right answer, but we can talk about it.
I think I think it's interesting, using the word healthy, because I think people don't naturally associate, when you think of the word healthy, your instinct is to think of physical health. When you think of health in general, I think people's instinct is to think of physical health, and they don't really see that health can tie into emotional, social, and cognitive health as well. And I think that's what probably makes it quite hard. And it's interesting how you use the example of if you're not feeling too good, you think, oh, maybe it's tiredness. And I know I had that growing up, this idea of if I was probably feeling low, I actually didn't have the language to use that. So instead I'd say things like, oh, you must just be really, really tired. And that's how I'd answer if someone said, oh, are you okay?
Yeah.
But I think it's quite interesting that actually I think a lot of society doesn't know what necessarily mentally healthy would look like. I don't know whether that actually answers your question.
It really
at
does.
all.
Yeah.
But,
I think what you're saying really speaks to what we do to young children. We often say to children who are starting to have tantrums, oh, you're really tired. And sometimes they are tired, and sometimes they do need to eat. But sometimes they're actually really angry, or they're really frustrated, or they're really upset. But we don't help with emotional literacy when we dismiss people as, oh, you must need a good night's sleep. So there's something about how we think about health, and one way to think about this is the idea of a workable range. That we're emotional beings. Emotions fluctuate. We all experience emotional highs and lows. That's kind of completely normal in life. Sometimes life impinges on us quite heavily, so we might have lots of stresses, lots of losses, going back to the conditions of life. So, you know, somebody living in a community that's just had mass unemployment has suddenly kind of descended on an area because a large employer's moved out of town and there aren't prospects, and then there's, you know, you kind of got environmental triggers and things like flooding, and so you could understand when that's microcosm somebody might start feeling a lot, the stresses are impinging and some people are going to feel a lot worse kind of emotionally. So there's something about knowing ourselves, so to have a sense of our own workable range, so when we can normally navigate the highs and lows of life on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, I think that really helps with the kind of, it's like you were saying, how do we set a yardstick for ourselves so that we then start to notice if something's getting out of sync. And I know all the kind of literature, the medical literature says things like, if you notice you're not enjoying things you would normally enjoy, if you're losing your enthusiasm, if you notice you can't fall asleep, you're waking in the middle of the night, you can't, you know, your appetite is significantly changing, you're kind of turning to substances like drinking more than you wouldn't, you know, you kind of notice. And I often think it's about noticing the internal voice, because often we might be doing things that are kind of poor coping strategies, and there's a part of us that's like, this doesn't really feel right to me, but I'm going to do it anyway. So something about knowing yourself, and I also think there's something about trusting the people around us, and this bit can be quite difficult, but I think we've all been there when a friend or a family member is maybe not doing great and we want to talk to them, and we, you know, find a way to say, look, are you okay? So there's something about, if it's us that's the not doing great person, do we trust the people around us to help us think about what we're going through?
Yeah, and thank you. I think that's exactly what I wanted kind of more clarity on, especially because there are loads of kind of internet theories about how to know when you're not doing as well, but then some other people might think, oh well, that's kind of just what I drink on a normal basis, but that's not as normal for other people, so how do I navigate that? Or some people just do need more sleep, and you know, some people do need to eat more, and I find that like for example, when I'm hungry I just feel so out of it, and then as soon as I eat I'm like, okay cool, I feel fine now. And yeah, establishing what your normal is. I think there are so many other questions I could ask about sort of if you've learned certain things that are unhealthy for you, how to navigate that, but I think that's a bit of a different question as well.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that at the Oxfordshire Recovery College, that's kind of our main premise, is that it's all individual. So that's all of our courses, they're run and as they're facilitated kind of discussions and activities, and there's not so much of the tutors on the courses telling the students what they should or shouldn't be doing. A lot of it is through guidance and actually what it's posing questions, what actually helps you as an individual, and how can you find that out, and about forming your own wellness plans that actually work for you, and your own individual indicators on when your mental health is starting to decline. One of our tutors talks about how he experiences backache, and he will be going about his day-to-day life and he'll think he's doing fine, and then he said his first sign is backache because he's holding tension there, and that's where, and it's these little things that you almost have to come aware of what your mental health can look like when it's good, and what your mental health can look like when it's in decline.
And I think it's worth mentioning that we have different capacities for what's this, the interoception, this awareness of ourselves and our bodies and our feelings. And so the other thing is, if listening to this you're kind of, oh, that I'm not connecting with this at all. So one of the things that therapy can do is it can help you develop your awareness of your physical body and what that tells you about your emotions. Because obviously, we talk about butterflies in our stomachs. So we tend to feel our emotional states quite physiologically. And we notice it in how we're thinking. Everybody can relate to when you're having a really good day and you're kind of feeling really happy and up, and you have lots of really buoyant, energetic, ambitious, creative thoughts. And then when you're having a less buoyant day, and your thoughts will tend to be more negative, more pessimistic, possibly a bit more self-critical. But similarly with our bodies, we can notice, like you say, whether it's tension and a backache, or it's a feeling of energy. There's something about what our bodies tell us as well.
Yes, and I think when it comes to kind of students who tend to be at a crossroads, especially kind of younger students perhaps, but sometimes even kind of older students who are kind of coming back to study and not really sure what to do next, locating like the self and identifying what the self even is. And I could go into a philosophical thing now, but that can be really difficult in itself. So I guess the point of this whole discourse is there is no one way to reach a conclusion, and it's about kind of going down the path that suits you, and even if you go down that path and you're not sure if it does suit you, be willing to try a different path. And I think that's the thing that's most pertinent there. Wonderful. I think we just have one more question before I think Jane has to leave us, and then we might talk a little bit more about the Recovery College after that. But we're thinking a lot about resilience, I think, as well, and sort of what it means to weather emotions that we perceive as more negative. Can you talk about how your respective kind of organisations look at resilience and kind of how you can kind of help students with that? If that makes sense, this question.
Yeah, so I'll talk about that. So I think at the Recovery College we kind of view it almost as a skill that can be built upon and developed and put into practice. So we actually have a course coming up in June called Skills for Recovery, Acceptance, Purpose and Resilience. And it's kind of, we view it as this is a skill that you can practice. And I think for a lot of our students, resilience can look like having not left the house because of depression, and then the first thing we do is go to like a Recovery College course. Like that can be a big step, and I think like sometimes it's something that is built upon, and then you might come to more courses, and it's that idea of actually just building up that resilience, building on something and building on that like bravery, I guess.
Thank you. That's great.
What about you, Jane?
So I think resilience. So I think it's really important to remember that resilience is something that doesn't happen in isolation, and that in order to be resilient, people need to be in systems and environments that support that and don't undermine it. So again, going back to conditions of finance, housing, occupation, community support, friends, family. So I think the first thing for me is I think it's really important we don't individualise resilience, because then it becomes this thing that people are either good at or not, and it's actually much more complicated than that. But what does the student counselling service do to support individual resilience for students? So I think the first thing is that the baseline for us is that we meet with students individually initially. So students will have a consultation with a clinical member of staff for 50 minutes. It's confidential, it's one-to-one, and it's the starting point for hopefully a trusting relationship between either those two individuals or with that student and our service. So I think that's the baseline, and then from there we may offer brief therapy, we may offer a space in one of our groups. We run therapeutic groups, we have a mindfulness course, we have a really comprehensive workshops programme. We're looking at all sorts of things from kind of self-compassion to anxiety management to, there's just I think there's 22 different groups running this term alone, so I won't mention them all here.
Amazing, yeah.
And there's also the things that we do that are very closely connected, such as the peer support programme, which is in 38 colleges. So again, one of the ways to build resilience is to build community, to build connection, to build relationships. It's really, the bedrock of good mental health is psychological security. And if you feel you belong in your local community, you're more likely to feel you're going to feel secure, and then that enables you to then step out and to kind of take on the challenges of life. Whereas I think there's a kind of really kind of big web of how we support resilience. So it's everything from the peer support programme, which is in all the colleges, there's hundreds of peer supporters, to the one-to-one in a room between a therapist and a student.
Nice. Oh, absolutely perfect. And I think there's a lot kind of to look at there, but the main thing is that there's so much on offer, both within the university and outside of it. And if people kind of are curious about more resources, I'm sure they can email the counselling service, and there's a lot of signposting available if they find that some specific therapies or kind of groups don't work for them specifically. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of there can be a lot of talk about waiting times and waiting lists, but for example, we haven't had a waiting list this term. We're booking students in within 2 to 3. Yeah, so we contact students the day after we receive their form, and then we're offering appointments within 2 or 3 weeks as standard, and then we have a way of seeing somebody quicker if we think there's a real urgency about what they're telling us. And so I suppose what I'm saying is, please do encourage your friends, your college mates to refer themselves in if they're concerned about how they're feeling. And it's much better to have a single appointment now and be hopefully reassured that actually you're okay, rather than wait a few months till things have got really difficult.
Yes, yeah, definitely trying to prevent more long-term issues. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jane. That's great. Great to have you join us today.
Thank you so much.
Good to meet you. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much. Jessie, if we can just chat for 5 minutes about the training we're doing, and then we can maybe wrap up there.
Yes. Yeah. There we go.
Thank you. I think this has been a great conversation in terms of just getting a couple of clarification points out there, of thinking about how difficult it is to locate some of those emotions, how difficult it can be to know where to go for help, when to seek help. But I guess the crux of the point is that there's no one way to be healthy. There's no one way to seek that help, and there's no one way to be. So that's great.
I think Jane made such a good point there, that actually resilience can be built through that community. I think that is so that in itself, that is such a valuable thing to remember. Powerful. I think that's what's so good about Oxfordshire Recovery College, is that's what it offers. It offers you a community. The 3 values are hope, opportunity and control, and it offers that sort of opportunity to be around people and be learning together with others from all different walks of life. So and I think that builds resilience. Yes. I think
100%. And I think why I'd really sort of recommend it, and why I'm glad we're talking to you today, is that Oxford students, I don't know how often they get out of the student bubble. So for people who are in colleges, the college bubble, if you're more sort of kind of aligned with your department, it can be a really great way to kind of escape that stress, speaking to someone who isn't as part of the system, who you can kind of explain some of the more silly Oxford traditions to, but also get a perspective on how other people think and how other people are dealing with things. I think it's so valuable to get that perspective. So thank you so much. I think if we could just round up then and just chat a bit about our welfare training that we're planning. So I can introduce that a little bit. So as some of you may know, I'm trying to design a sort of welfare training for student society, specifically because a lot of students have been reaching out about the role of students in supporting others and supporting other students, and kind of trying to uphold the welfare system and signpost effectively. But there isn't as much kind of welfare support provision for officers of student societies. So what we've done is the SU have partnered with the Oxfordshire Recovery College, because they do some amazing courses, and we're designing a specific kind of society training that specifies, one, what a welfare representative is actually meant to do and what their remit hopefully is, and thinking about that a lot more, and then 2, sort of thinking about how to properly look after your own well-being in a welfare position, and think about your friends as well. So I don't know if Jessie, you want to add to that at all?
So I think we'd spoken about this before, so we're quite excited for building this sort of partnership, because one thing with the Recovery College that we wanted to build on is our relationships with universities within Oxford, and build on what we can be doing for mental health for young people. So I know that we will be talking about how you can support someone else, support your peers. Also, we'll be looking at how you can look after yourself. But it will just be a mix of things. But it will be quite exciting to be able to collaborate. But
as an SU, we're kind of thinking a lot more about how we can take more of an active role in these conversations. Obviously, the sabbatical officers sit on a lot of university committees, including the mental health ones. But I think there are things that we can kind of be doing independently, as well as kind of consulting on more of the policy issues. So look out for that, and get in touch if you have any questions. I think my email's on our website if anyone wants to have any clarifications, or we're at 4 Worcester Street a lot of the time as well. Any other closing remarks?
Yes, so I was just also going to plug, we're doing Library of Life event. So Oxfordshire Recovery College, we're doing a Library of Life event tomorrow at the Story Museum. So that's on Pembroke Street. So at 5:30 till 7:30, we'll just be showing a collection of video stories on mental health recovery that have been made by our students and tutors at the college, and at the Forensic Recovery College at the Littlemore wards. But yeah, I would just encourage anyone to come along if you were interested in mental health in Oxfordshire in particular, and just empowering people with mental health and how we can support those. So
that sounds really, really exciting. Can you just repeat those details? So the 18th of May.
18th of May, 5:30 till 7:30 at the Story Museum on Pembroke Street, in the Whispering Woods Gallery. So it'll be exciting.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Well, yeah, I think that's all from us. Thank you so much for everyone kind of who's tuned in, or if you're listening to the recorded version. Thank you so much for that. Hopefully this is only the beginning of a lot of collaborations with more local Oxfordshire organisations, as well as the university and the student union. So if you have any sort of interest in getting involved in these conversations, if there's anything with the university that you think needs to change, please do reach out to us. But otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.